Welcome to the Evolved Caveman Podcast. I am Dr. John, the guide for your heroic journey towards greater health, success, and most importantly, happiness. And now, on with the show. Hey everybody, this is Dr. John back with the latest episode of the Evolved Caveman Podcast. Thank you for listening. And today I'm going to be doing something a little bit different. I'm giving a keynote address here at the Health 2.0 conference in Vegas this Tuesday. And so I thought I would use the opportunity to use the podcast as a chance to practice. That might be a little bit redundant, but you get the point. So the keynote is called The Man Box, the rules of what it means to be a man and how those rules cut men off from true happiness and longevity. My name is Dr. John, and I've been working with men for over 25 years. I've worked with everyone from CEOs to elite athletes to military special ops to convicted murderers to every man. And I've long looked for some of the influences on what makes men tick. So if you're a man listening to this, my suggestion to you is to listen with great curiosity, an open mind, and tremendous self-compassion. There's no wrong here. It's just a matter of becoming more aware and then figuring out what parts of you want to change and what parts you're comfortable with. If you're a woman listening to this, I've given this talk to many women and found that it greatly increases their compassion that they have for the man in their life, assuming heterosexuality. And so just listen to it again with curiosity and see what you think. All right. When I was a boy in middle school, I was about 11 years old. I was pretty small at that point. And as a result, I had quite a talent for being a smartass. And I remember I was sitting out at recess one day and I was being a smartass with my friends. And all of a sudden, the school bully, an eighth grader, walked up and punched me in the stomach, sucker punched me. And it completely took me by surprise, knocked the wind out of me. And I remember that I was trying to hold back tears, and I couldn't catch my breath for the longest time. And in that moment, several of my primal world beliefs changed, because to me, in that moment, the world became a more dangerous place. It went from being a playground to being more of a battleground. It went from a place where people were much more likely to hurt me. And I think maybe most importantly, I got angry at my own emotions for humiliating me because I couldn't manage them. I couldn't control them. I couldn't keep from crying, which is not what you want to be doing as an 11-year-old sixth grader. So that's kind of how we get brought into this man box. There's a number of ways. It starts at a very young age, starts in preschool or kindergarten. As soon as we get around groups of other boys, sometimes these rules get taught to us by parents, not always. Usually it's other boys teaching these rules. Usually it's older boys. Sometimes it's coaches. It's definitely media, the movies that we watch, the music that we listen to. And the rules look something like this: be tough, be aggressive, don't back down. In fact, I was listening to a Stray Cats song recently, Rock This Town. And there's a line in there: look at me once, look at me twice, look at me again, and there's going to be a fight. We're going to rock this town. And I was like, wow, that's kind of the epitome of man box. Like, I'm going to fight you because you're staring at me. Other rules are females are objects, the property of men. Females are weak, they need to be rescued. Compete, succeed, win at all costs. And when we're younger in school, that competition largely happens physically through sports. For some academically, but then later as we get older, that competition morphs to wealth and power. Another rule is be self-reliant. Do not ask for help. When I was growing up, my best friend's father was so self-reliant, he would pull out his own rotting teeth in the garage with a pair of pliers. A little bit extreme, but you get the idea. And then kind of the classics of do not act feminine and do not act gay. And I've spoken with people in many different countries to check it out to see if this was true for them when they were growing up. And they've said, yes, the words are different, but the meaning underneath them is exactly the same. And the big one to me, the one that's most damaging for us, and there's some good and bad in here, but the big one is be stoic. Do not feel. And as I mentioned, there's a mixed bag. So some of these are good to a point. Let's take self-reliance for just as an example. So I want you to think of self-reliance on a 1 to 10 scale, with 1 being completely dependent on someone else and 10 being totally self-reliant. I don't ask anybody for help. And it's pretty easy to see that either end of that spectrum, there's problems that can happen. And I see a lot of men who are towards that 10 on that scale and just will not ask for help, even when they're depressed, even when they're suicidal, even when they're anxious. They just think, I got to gut this out on my own. And that's a problem. And keep in mind, we're speaking about gender here, the spectrum of masculine to feminine. So this is separate and distinct from sex, which is the spectrum of male to female. So you can have a masculine female, you can have a feminine male, and anywhere in between. So as I'm speaking about this, it's not applicable to just males. So the biggest problem to me, as I mentioned, is be stoic. In my experience, boys learn to shut down roughly 2/3 of the emotional spectrum. When boys show too much fear or sadness in public around other young males, they get something like, dude, don't be such a pussy, don't be a little bitch, or don't be a little girl. Now, there's other insults, but those are kind of the big 3 that all indicate don't be feminine. On the other side of the emotional spectrum, when boys show too much love or joy or excitement or happiness or, God forbid, flamboyance, they get, dude, don't be a fag, or don't be so gay. I apologize for the slurs, but that's what we get. And I don't think it takes many times of receiving these put downs and insults for us to internalize these rules. And then we also say, wow, that hurts. That's embarrassing. That's humiliating. I don't like that. I'm not going to show it again. And in fact, I'm going to work to suppress it. And it's wrong to show it, and it's wrong to feel it. And that's where we get into some real problems. So what emotions do we learn that we can safely demonstrate? I would argue it's 3 things. Stress, because if I say to you, oh my God, I'm so stressed, it indicates at some level that I'm busy or important. Lust, oh my gosh, look at that ass in those jeans. And the big one, some degree of anger, irritation, frustration, annoyance, anger, rage. And anger is what we deal with the most. So a little bit about anger. Anger is often, but not always, a secondary emotion, which means that it can come immediately on the heels, like 1/3 of a second immediately, after emotions like anxiety or depression or embarrassment, guilt or shame. And we don't even recognize the emotions underneath the anger. Heck, we don't even realize when we're angry in the moment a lot of times. So let me share with you some of the common anger dynamics to show why this is such a problem. So when we get angry, and this is true for all of us, we get defensive. So we're defending our position, and we're not looking at, what was my part in this drama? How could I change? How could I improve? We externalize blame. So everything is someone else's fault. If you would just stop being such a fill in the blank, I wouldn't be so angry. Anger is addictive. It's energizing. It's empowering. It feels good. Anger likes to try and keep itself alive by focusing on things in the environment that annoy us or anger us. Anger shuts down learning, growth, and curiosity because we think we know everything in the moment when we're angry. Anger undermines connection, safety, respect. And consider that in corporations, the number one indicator from a Google study a few years ago of an effective team is the feeling of psychological safety. So what undermines safety more than anything else? In my opinion, it's anger. And keep in mind this idea of trauma. And I like Faith Harper's definition of trauma, where she says that trauma is any disconnection from a feeling of safety. Now, that's a low bar of trauma, but if you look back in your life and think about some of the times you might have been traumatized, anger is behind a lot of that, someone else's anger. Now, here's the other kind of big twist here, that the anger that we men feel is fueled by male depression. Because we're so disconnected from ourselves, we're not even aware of what we're feeling. And the only safe way for depression to come out is through degrees of anger. So let me just give you a quick side-by-side of depression in females versus depression in males. So female depression, the hallmarks are she blames herself for any problems. She's sad and tearful. She's vulnerable and easily hurt. She withdraws when feeling hurt. She often suffers in silence. She maintains control of her anger, and she's overwhelmed by her feelings. Now, this is kind of what we classically think of as depression. But now let's turn to male depression. And men, when they're depressed, they blame other people for their problems. They're irritable and impatient. They're suspicious and guarded. They attack when they feel hurt or criticized. They overreact, and then they feel sorry later. They lose control of their anger, and their feelings are blunted or they're numb, often referred to as alexithymia. And look at all that list. Every one of those just about has some degree of anger connected with it. So, so what? What does it matter? Well, this has a huge impact on our relationships when we grow up and get into a romantic relationship, heterosexual or homosexual, because positive psychology has found that one of the key sources of happiness lies in relationships, and in particular, our romantic relationship. But the man box socialization process, it limits our ability to connect with others. We are not encouraged, we're not socialized to step into a relationship, to learn more about how to communicate, to learn more about how to label what we're feeling. And it's largely due to this limited emotional awareness, the communication challenges, and our crazy irritability, leading to an epidemic of lonely, disconnected men. And here's some of the sobering stats for you. Life expectancy for men is 5 years less than women. Men are 3.5 times as likely to die, more likely to die by suicide. Men are more likely to abuse drugs and alcohol. Men are half as likely to seek out mental health care than women. 43% of men say they have to hide their true selves at work. And this one blew my mind. 67% of men would rather shock themselves than be alone with their own thoughts. 2/3 of us would rather shock ourselves than be alone with our own mind. Okay, so what's the impact on our relationships? Well, right now in the US, 75% of divorces are initiated by the wife. And the biggest complaint I've heard is, I can't connect with my partner. And here's the crux of this whole idea. This is not the fault of men. We did not ask to be socialized like this. It just happens. Unless you're in there are some other areas, Tahiti, there's some island cultures where there is not a risk of neighbors invading and where resources are plentiful. And masculinity develops differently there. It's interesting. There's a tripolar model of gender versus a bipolar model. So while this is not our fault, it is our responsibility to evolve beyond it. Because it's not only hurting us, it's hurting the people we're in relationship with. So what areas do men need to evolve in? I would say first, it's about self-awareness, and hence the reason for this talk. Because 95% of people think that they are self-aware. and this is from research by Tasha Eurich, 95 people think they are highly self-aware, when in fact, it's about 10 to 15%. We are creatures of habit, and we are creatures of mindlessness. So self-awareness has to improve. Next, I believe that we have to increase emotional granularity. We have to improve our emotional vocabulary. I mean, think of when you've got an infant or a toddler, all they can do when they're experiencing pain, discomfort, hunger, dirty diaper is scream. And over time, we say, use your words, honey. Use your words. It's the same thing for men. Use your words. But you have to have the words to put on your internal experience to share it with others. And we know from studies at UCLA that simply putting the right emotion label on what you're feeling turns down the intensity of that feeling. It also increases our ability to empathize because we've got a better idea of what we're feeling, then we can empathize more easily with what others are feeling. Third, I want to give you permission to feel whatever it is you're feeling. There is no wrong to emotion. And I like the adage here from mindfulness of allow whatever's arising to arise without judgment. And that without judgment phrase takes years to get the hang of. Because we're so quick and automatic to go into those negative spirals of, let's say I get angry at my daughter and I yell at her, and then I feel guilt, and then I feel shame, and then I feel embarrassment, and then I feel anger at myself for losing my temper. And you can see where we pile on. So give yourself permission to feel. It doesn't mean that you can do whatever you want based on that emotion. Realize also that emotion and the action you take based on the emotion, those are two separate things. So you can feel anger and speak to it calmly. Hey, honey, I need you to speak to me with more respect, or I need you to bring the volume of your voice down. It feels to me like you're getting a little heated. Fourth, work on being quick and easy to laugh and smile. We men take ourselves way too seriously. And every man I've ever spoken to hates to be embarrassed. And we do so many things to avoid embarrassment, whereas it would be so much easier to just step into it and laugh at yourself. But I think overall, the more we can improve our sense of humor and be quick and easy to laugh and smile, the better things get for everyone around us. And fifth, we've got to deal with our male depression and ultimately our anger. So if some of those symptoms applied to you, be open to the possibility that maybe you're dealing with some male depression. There's no shame in that. I mean, right now, ever since COVID, the stats have gone from 12% of the population are experiencing depression and or anxiety to 40%. That's 4 out of 10 people right now are dealing with depression and or anxiety. You are not alone. So here's a couple tools you can try out to kind of begin to improve things. So to begin dismantling your anger, you can ask yourself, what other emotions might be beneath my irritation? What might be beneath my anger? And as I mentioned before, it can be guilt, shame, embarrassment, humiliation, anxiety, sadness. But the biggest one for me in my experience has been hurt. Someone just hurt my feelings. So now when I start to get angry, I'll instantly ask myself, did my feelings just get hurt? Because it's a much different conversation if you go ham, if you go wild anger on, let's say, your spouse because she hurt your emotions or hurt your feelings versus, hey, honey, you know, when you said that, I don't know, I'm too short, that really hurt my feelings. Those are going in two completely different directions. And I think you can guess which one's going to have a better ending. Another tool to try out is to look at Jared Clifton's work on primal world beliefs. He's at University of Pennsylvania. I think this is really, really important research that he just started. But there's about 27 beliefs, core beliefs that we have about the world in general. And so one of the key ones I would say is, how do you see the world? Do you see the world as a battleground or a playground? And it's my belief that, things happen to us, traumatic events or getting punched in the stomach, that, shift our beliefs. And it's up to us to be aware that that happens and to actively work to shift them back. Pick the belief that serves you best. And you can imagine how, this extends from it's about the world, but then there's also these layers of beliefs that have to do with, what do you believe about people in general? And what do you believe about yourself? And I really like this idea that, to what extent do you think people are trustworthy? And you could, put that on a 1 to 100 scale. Everyone's trustworthy to nobody's trustworthy. And what percentage in between? And I've had people tell me only 20% of people out there are trustworthy. That's a much different world to live in than if I believe 90% of people are trustworthy. To what extent are people kind versus unkind? To what extent would people help you out versus not? All these things make a huge impact. And the research on these world beliefs shows that these beliefs seem to underlie our thoughts, our feelings, and our actions. So, quick example. Let's say you go to the supermarket and you believe that most people will hurt you. There's no reason to engage with anyone in line. There's no reason to be kind or curious about the cashier. And you gain nothing. There's no drops of positive emotion going into your positive emotion bucket. And those beliefs are self-reinforcing. Now, if you believe that people are generally kind and generally trustworthy, then you go to the supermarket and maybe you have a 2-minute conversation with the lady behind you in line, just in an attempt to connect with her and maybe make her smile. And you connect with the cashier. You ask about his belief or his interest in classic cars that you know about. And you walk away with a smile, and he stays there with a smile, and you both win. And that becomes self-reinforcing too. Now multiply those out by the number of interactions you have each day times days in the year, and you start to see how these accumulate and make a big difference. Third, ask yourself several times a day, what am I feeling right now? And this has been shown in research to increase your self-awareness, to increase your emotional self-awareness, and to increase your emotional granularity. And the thing I love about this is it doesn't even matter if you answer the question. There's something powerful about pausing and asking yourself, what am I feeling right now? And part of this I would add is getting out of your head, which is where we men spend a lot of our time. Descartes, I think, therefore I am. But that's not where you discover how you feel. You discover how you feel by paying attention to your body. We say that emotions are embodied. So ask yourself, what am I feeling right now? And just kind of be curious about, where am I sensing things going on in my body? Fourth, I really want to encourage you all to be curious. And I think this takes a little bit of courage to be open to learning more about your internal landscape. There's a saying, my mind is like a scary neighborhood at night where nobody goes alone. And I think that's a pretty common experience, that people are afraid to look inwards, as evidenced by the 67% of men that would rather shock themselves and be alone with their thoughts. I think that we want to really be open and curious about what's going on internally, as that's the way to increase self-awareness. That's the way to increase emotional granularity. And that's the way to improve our relationships. So let me end with another quick story. Many years ago, I think it was 20 years ago, 25 years ago, I was presenting at a continuation high school. And this is a high school where students go when they fail out of traditional high school for any number of reasons: drugs, falling behind on credits, pregnancy, behavior problems, ADHD, whatever it is. And I was presenting there once a month, and the students seemed to like it. So I show up at the office, and the principal is kind of walking with me to the room where I'm presenting. And she's telling me about this new student that they got, African-American, 16 years old, really hard case, group home, doesn't have a family. And I'm kind of thinking, why are you telling me this? Like, I'm presenting to the whole school. And I was a little bit annoyed because I was presenting in 5 minutes. So I was trying to get my mind around that. So I go into the room, the whole school's in there in the auditorium, and I start presenting, and it was on positive psychology or something. And I get 2 sentences into my presentation, and this young Black woman stands up, and I was thinking to myself, oh, this must be the student. And she says, I got a question for you. I'm female, I'm poor, I'm Black, I don't have a family. Why should I listen to anything you have to say? And I was like, oh, shit. And I thought, probably as fast as I've ever thought in my life. And I knew that if I challenged her, I would lose her. So I didn't challenge her. I said, here's what I said. Yeah, I totally hear what you're saying. You're right. I'm white, I'm bald, I'm middle-aged, I have a family, I have a home. And on those levels, we're different. And perhaps you shouldn't listen to anything I have to say on those levels. And here's what I can tell you. Here's what I can tell you. Anything you've ever felt in your life, anger, fear, shame, guilt, joy, happiness, love, anything, I also have felt. And on that level, we're exactly the same. Conditions might be different, but the emotions are the same. And I'm here to teach. And there's some free tools that I offer, and you can try them out for yourself. And if they work, great. If not, you've lost nothing. And with that, I went back and kind of rolled into my presentation. And somewhere over the next couple of weeks, this remarkable shift happened with her, and she began to try in class, and she began to get good grades and turn in her homework. And eventually she got on the Student Leadership Council. And a year and a half later, she was the commencement speaker. And no one thought she would go to college originally. And then she went to Sacramento State and went to college. And I don't know if it was what I said. There's good teachers there. There's great principal, but something happened, and it unlocked her curiosity. It unlocked her rigid thinking, and she began helping herself. And so I realized at that point, it's not about proving how one is unique or special. It's about finding ways to build bridges, to connect, to discover how we're similar across gender, sex, race, and culture. It's about giving yourself space for the many paradoxes that you contain, such as, I am unique and I'm exactly the same as everyone else. I am part of a tribe, and yet I'm independent. I am self-reliant, and yet I'm dependent on others. I simultaneously need certainty and I crave novelty. I need commitment in my relationship, and I need freedom. I need to know, and I need to not know. Because the height of psychological maturity may be thought of as the ability to hold multiple, often competing feelings, beliefs, and or thoughts about any one person or situation simultaneously. And that's it for me. Thank you very much. My name is Dr. John. And I don't think I'll say my last name because it's a mouthful. But anyway, that's the presentation. So thank you very much for listening. I appreciate it. It was a great chance to practice. And if you like this, please feel free to share it. Please feel free to like, rate, review. And if you didn't like it, you don't have to do a damn thing. That's it for this episode of the Evolved Caveman. This is Dr. John signing off.
Thank you for listening to the Evolved Caveman Podcast. If you like what you've heard, support us by subscribing, leaving reviews, and sharing the podcast with friends and colleagues. For the latest, most powerful tools to connect with like-minded men, join the Facebook group at The Evolved Caveman. Follow Dr. John on Instagram at The Evolved Caveman, all one word, or join the email list by visiting guidetoself.com.